when we pause and really check in, what's happening for me right now? How am I feeling? Why is this important? Because when we can do that, then we're working with our central nervous system and our body and mind to actually get to the root of the insight.
Hey everyone, I'm Angeline Constantinou, and this is Her Unapologetic Voice. This podcast was created for women who lead but are done leading from apology. Here we have real, unfiltered conversations about boundaries, truth, and confidence. The kind of talks that remind you your voice is not something you find once, it's something you build. Every episode will give you something real to take with you, whether it's a boundary script, a reflection tool, or simply the courage to say what you really mean. So if you're ready to lead from your truth, not from approval, this is your space. Your unapologetic voice starts here. Welcome back to Her Unapologetic Voice, the podcast and space where women rise, reclaim their power, and speak their truth without apology, or as I say, unapologetically. I'm your host, Angeline, and today's conversation is one that so many women silently struggle with, especially after leaving toxic or abusive relationships. We're talking about co-parenting, those moments where you're trying to hold it all together, but inside you feel like you're slipping. You know the moment, the text that you overthink, the reaction you wish you could take back. And if you've ever been there, this episode is for you. Today, I'm joined by Maria Natapov, a co-parenting and step-parenting expert, vice chair of the Sparrow Collective, and what she calls a co-parenting chaos calmer. Maria works with high-functioning parents who are used to being strong for everyone else, but are ready to stop losing themselves in the process. She's not just teaching this work, she's lived it. As a survivor of domestic abuse, a child of divorce, and now a step-parent turned adoptive mother, Maria understands these dynamics on a deeply personal level. This is going to be a powerful conversation about awareness, emotional regulation, and reclaiming your calm in moments that used to control you. So let's dive in and welcome Maria to Her Unapologetic Voice.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here with you, Angeline.
And it's great to have you here with us today. And Maria, can you take us back? I want to talk about your story, okay?
Sure.
And so can you take us back to your personal journey? What led you into this work? What inspired you?
Yeah, so as you've kind of given the highlight, to delve in a bit more, I was a child of an extremely contentious, even before I was officially divorced. This was dating myself back in the 80s in communist Russia. It was, nobody was really getting divorced. It was very taboo. I was an only child, so it was very contentious. Lots of screaming, lots of fighting, and my dad would leave for months at a time. I mean, it was chaos, and I would feel it in my body all the time. And eventually, when we moved here, when I was 8 years old, my dad left shortly after we moved for good. And then years later, when I was 13, they officially got divorced. Feeling that they primarily got married, and it was in this country, it was family. And their pain to stay together, the pressure and what that is like. So I have a sense they maybe should have never been together. They just didn't really mix well at all. And when we arrived here, I think it was both the tension in the home for many years, as well as the fact that culturally the oppression from the country sort of played out, I think, unintentionally through my parents and how they parented me, as well as my grandparents. They were like my primary caregivers when we first moved here. And I think those dynamics led me into an emotionally and physically abusive first marriage. And I had no idea. I was a very sheltered child when we met. And we met when I was 15. Wow. I stayed in that relationship till I was 31. And right, you don't know what you don't know. And more importantly, with those kinds of dynamics, right, an unhealthy dynamic, coercive control, those kinds of things, it's very entangling. And what happens is essentially your boundaries get encroached upon, but very slowly. So first it's an action. It's a few degrees above and rocks you. So that's how it basically slowly over time get conditioned to move more and more until sort of familiar to me from my childhood dynamics. Again, with good intentions, doesn't matter, same outcome. There's a lot of shaming and guilting and blaming and all sorts of things, and lots of deflection and projection, things like that. So, and at first I had to ask myself deeply, like, what kept me in that relationship? And I think it was that the common way of disciplining kids and encouraging them to and motivating them was to berate them to do better. And that was looked at as, this is how you get to success. Of course, had they known the impact of that, they probably would have never approached it that way. But again, we don't know, right? Or we didn't for sure back then. And so with this relationship, I felt true support and encouragement.
Oh, that's good.
Which might seem really like you might not be able to make sense of those two things coexisting, but they did for me at that point. And I think it was that need within myself that trumped everything else. Even and it was an isolating relationship, not this felt important at the time. I long time to think that. So when I found it, and motivated me because I didn't think I was good mom material, but he felt differently. So I became a stepmom. And 5 years into that journey, she revealed abuse and neglect by her bio mom and stepdad. And so I became a full-time mother figure when she moved in with us. And in spite of undergoing family therapy, she chose to have no contact. And 2 years ago, that was 7 years ago, she came to live with us full-time. 2 years ago, she had a lot of voice and choice in me adopting her. So this work is deeply personal because I know that even though I've lived through it as a child, there's nuanced layers that are just difficult to fully gain access to, skills that are very difficult to build in these dynamics to truly support the children the best of one's ability and not lose oneself and one's sanity in the process. So that's why I'm really passionate about this work, is the ripple and the impact and the breaking intergenerational cycles for family.
What a great story that you shared, Maria, and your passions. What was the turning point when you said something had to change? Something has to change.
Yeah, it was devastating being in the throes of that first marriage. I felt so alone. I think what started to happen is, and this is a common dynamic in relationships that have elements of like narcissistic tendencies and unhealthy dynamics, is there are times where you feel so connected and want to feel like you're the center of the universe, and there's times you're like the worst thing. And going through, like, the bad times were the norm and the good times were very few between. And I started to actually feel this, it felt like a toxic pit growing in my stomach that wouldn't budge. And it felt like it started to actually get larger and larger. And it wouldn't go even during the good times, quote unquote. And I was like, okay, I have to do something about this. This feels like a massive sign. I can't let this continue because it's going to lead somewhere really bad. I could just feel it. I didn't know what it was, and so I started to just ask the question, right? Like, that was the seed of the experience for me, was just daring to ask, like, how do I move forward? How do I get out of this? Like, I don't know what to do, right? And so just asking that question, wanting to hear the answer, was the beginning. And so slowly, right?
Exactly.
Hear my own intuition, my own wisdom, and things started to shift. Things started to open up. Resources came into my life, and just followed breadcrumbs to move forward.
Right, there you go. Let's talk about the family dynamics, because narcissistic abuse is a subject that people really are afraid to talk about. Is that true? The patterns.
I think so. I think it's because it's hard. Frequently, people are not familiar with it. So they're finding themselves in the midst of it and things feel off or bad, but they're not sure why. And then we get the message of, well, relationships are hard. They're hard work, right? So it's confusing because, well, it's true. They are work, but how do you know when it's just work because you're not identical people and you have different ideas, different thoughts, different backgrounds that you're trying to come together with, versus when it's actually toxic and it's detrimental to your well-being.
Exactly. And why do even high-functioning, successful parents struggle in these moments.
Exacerbated in that relationship, but they oftentimes started in childhood or at least much, much earlier on. And they
Right.
were undistinguished, right? Because when we can't see things for what they are, they just become part of the background. It almost feels like
Exactly.
this is just the backdrop. This is just the pattern. This is how it is, right? And we don't know anybody else's experience. We only know our own. We've only ever lived through our own eyes and conscious awareness. So I think that's why it's really difficult. And
Okay.
there's a lot of, right? There's a lot of like playing on our self-worth and the truth and and frequently it's usually the continuum is you have empaths, like highly empathetic, nurturing people on one end. And then on the other end is the narcissistic, self-involved individual. So
Right.
attract each other. So frequently, as the other person, you want to give the benefit of the doubt and you want to say, well, okay, this isn't how this person's receiving it. They must have my best intentions at heart. Like, what am I missing? Right? That to ourselves, not really well, even like this person really good intentions, right? Hypotheses that in the way. And it's not, and it almost requires us to question, what are we viewing? What are we receiving? Is this real? So I think it's really, really difficult to distinguish, especially by ourselves. Not impossible, but extremely difficult. And that's another reason that I'm passionate about this work. The other is frequently these people are used to overfunctioning, meaning protecting the outcome, the emotions of others through their emotions and, trying to impact outcome. Like if I do these things, if I just keep the peace, things will be fine, but it's unsustainable. And what they're not realizing is frequently they are actually self-abandoning, but also they're undermining the very goal that they want, which is to create the peace. Because if we're not letting everybody arrive and within their power, right, like in their own contribution to this whole dynamic, then even though our intention is good, our intention is to have a better outcome, but ultimately there's a power play, right? We're not really respecting that person as a whole entity who's responsible for their actions and decisions. None of that is helpful, and we're just that.
Okay, let me ask you this question, and thank you so much for sharing. What is one simple technique women could use immediately when they feel triggered?
I think the power of the pause is the most useful place.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Because, right, when we pause and really check in, what's happening for me right now? How am I feeling? Why is this important, right? Because when we can do that, then we're working with our central nervous system and our body and mind to actually get to the root of the insight available to us to show up from a place of clarity and purpose. If we don't do that, we can just follow the emotional trail. Now emotions come and go, they're fleeting, and they're not necessarily the entire story. They're just an indication of something going on, something that is demanding our attention is happening right now, is all that is. So if we're not reading those signs, we can, if we're self-active, we can get ourselves in a lot of trouble. When you like it, and you imagine if you just reacted, I mean, maybe your impulse was to be angry and swear at him, right? Like if we just absolutely like gave none of our actions or intentions any thought, and we recklessly walk through life impulsively saying and doing whatever came to mind, and the first sight of it coming to mind, it'll be a really difficult place to navigate. It's right. It often doesn't lead to good outcomes. And this is no different. But again, frequently, because we're so taxed, especially, like I said, these people tend to be over functioning a lot. And then you add to it the dynamic of truly not being safe. Say it was determined, or maybe a therapist pointed out, or perhaps a coach, or maybe even their attorney, hey, this feels like an unsafe dynamic. Something's amiss here. Now you're panicking. If you have children with this person, they're your most prized entity, right? Like your most prized relationship. The things you want to protect most are their well-being, their welfare, their long-term success. So of course you're going to have strong emotions. The stake as high as they could, and navigate like this to our maximum. We're on any stressors, any additional decision to make, anything like that is an extra heavy lift. So it doesn't take much for us to reach our breaking point. right?
That's
So when
true.
we're thinking about triggers under all of that weight of everything we're enduring, right, we're very fertile for that to take over, which is why it's extra important to ensure we have the right support to not just be responding from a place of being triggered.
Have you ever felt like you lost yourself somewhere along the way? Maybe through heartbreak, divorce, trauma, people pleasing, or constantly pouring into everyone else while forgetting you. My coaching program is designed to help women reconnect with who they truly are, rebuild their confidence, heal emotionally, and step into the next chapter of their life with clarity, purpose, and self-worth. So today we work on mindset, identity, emotional healing, confidence, boundaries, self-care, self-love, and creating a life that finally feels aligned with the woman that you're becoming. And if you've been feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or simply ready for more, I'd love to invite you to book a virtual coffee chat with me. No pressure, just a real conversation to connect, share your journey, and see how I can support you. Okay. Got it. And how do we stop repeating the same emotional cycles? When we talk about breaking the pattern, how do we stop repeating the same emotional cycles?
Yeah. So the pause is stabilizing the moment, which is really powerful and important. But ultimately, if we're in the place of constantly what I call bleeding out is the analogy, right? So we're completely stretched thin and emotionally, from an emotional standpoint, we're in this place where we're bleeding out and we keep putting a new Band-Aid to stop the bleed, right? Or maybe plugging the hole. Well, as much as that's useful to keep us alive in that moment, it's not sustainable. We need to just that be also need something that's which is skills, a system, structure, and strategy, right? And something that actually works in a practical application, meaning accessible to us in our day-to-day, actually addressing what the true day-to-day that we face. So say we're co-parenting with somebody that we absolutely, it just doesn't work for us to be in the same space. It's not safe, it's not healthy, it's not good for our kids. Okay. No problem. Then we need to create a structure that will allow us to not have to be in the same space where we could still be our best selves for our children, right? We need to find another way to exchange communication and make shared decisions, because frequently, unfortunately, even in the case of many times physical abuse, parents still have shared legal custody, which means they have to make joint decisions together when it comes to the welfare or major decisions around their children's well-being and day-to-day activities. So maybe it's medical activities, maybe it's around where they're going to school, things of that. So there is no way to just say, well, I'm going to associate, and kids are very heavily full of families. We want is essentially this pressure that, and they want to make sure that they are on the side of justice. And they really are not equipped to do that. Even adult children, it's too much for them. They're both parents, right? They're half of each of the parents, and they deserve to have access to as good of a relationship as available. Now, they may decide that they don't want one, but frequently when they're saying things like that, when they're still really young, even as a teenager or a young adult, because our brains don't fully form until our late 20s, that frequently means that they're just really hurt and they are feeling the pressure to side with one parent over the other.
Got it. Okay.
And that takes a toll. And what essentially it does, and especially if they're even younger than that, is it really stunts their development, because now they're essentially being a version of parentified, right? They're having to carry an adult emotional burden as a child. So the energy that's supposed to be going towards them figuring out their identity and their social, in their social system, both in their family, as it relates to their peers, as it relates to school, it's instead of figuring tech moms or dads want to be heard, because right, what if I'm next? What if they are just going to divorce me? What happens to me? It's terrifying, right? They're very much dependent on their parents, and they frequently want and need access to both in order to have security, emotional security. And frequently, it's actually the degree of parental conflict that is the greatest predictor to how well children will adjust during and post a separation or divorce. It's not the event, which many people think is the issue. It's actually just how much parental conflict are they being exposed to, the duration, the frequency, and the severity.
There you go. There you go. And when you talked about structures, what structures or systems can help create consistency in co-parenting communication?
Yeah, so that's the piece that is highly individualized, right? But as I touched on briefly, it's about how do we navigate these decisions? How do we know what's really most important to consider? Right now, as I'm navigating this situation, how do I know that I'm child's well-being? What and they want their child. Well, if they are speaking of attitude, or maybe it's that like passive aggressive, there's a tone, there's a smirk, there's things that we perceive. Say that they express that in front of the child towards their co-parent, or maybe even their co-parent isn't there and the child's talking about their co-parent and they're expressing these things. And then they are being extremely polite and kind to the pizza delivery person.
Right.
What message is that sending to their child about respect, right? Parent who, again, they are half of. So if they're perceiving resentment or negativity towards this other individual, they're asking, okay, is some of that directed at me too? I'm half of that person. This is a small example of how this lives in action. And so the structures are really, as I said, right? How do we ensure that how we're responding, what we're thinking about, and how we're regulating and stabilizing the moment ourselves, we can make this decision, but also for our child. And then are we create an opportunity for making decisions together? Art is truly at this the thing that we are prioritizing, because frequently that's what's going to lead to overall long-term best outcomes for that child, but really for the family as a whole, because as we said, nobody gets divorced from being a parent. So that is forever.
That's true.
So these dynamics, right, especially if we think about children's milestones, like their high school graduation, eventually college graduation, career milestones, maybe they get engaged or married or have kids of their own. If we want to be a part of that, in order to be invited, we need to reduce the conflict. We need to find a way to create civility and peace. And really it just comes down to peace, right? So that's what is requiring a structure. And that structure has to be created by the parents. I guide parents through a whole framework. A lot of what we address, in addition to actual day-to-day, like what does this look like in action so that it's effective for them, is mindset shifts, really, because we have to find a way to relieve that conflict, right? How do we embrace letting go of it, right? Like Rail was to say that we condone everything that's happening. To say,
there you go. So let's talk about, and I'm so glad you touched on that, because I know, like I have friends, they co-parent. I have a very good friend, she lives in Chicago, and I went to her son's, it was his graduation party, and the other parent was there. So I could see what does healthy co-parenting actually look like?
It depends on, again, each situation is going to be different, because some people can manage to, be kind to each other and be in the same event together. And maybe it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to sit next to each other and spend time chit-chatting, but maybe they can say hello. But that's not the only way that it looks, because it could also be that they absolutely cannot be in the same room together, as I said, but they still can be a part of supporting the child in whatever endeavors they're pursuing. So for example, maybe it looks like if little Timmy is playing soccer and both be at the same soccer event, there's an opposite end bleachers. It's just the right, always the cost of conflict.
Okay.
So and we've, because that is really to prioritize that question. So if they can't, maybe, for example, the parents take turns going to the soccer event in real life, but perhaps little Timmy can have FaceTime call with the parent who's not attending before the game to give them like a little, hey, you're going to do great, like a little pep talk. And then maybe another one after the event to say, how was it? Tell me all about it. I can't wait to hear all about it, right? So they're still involved, they're still a part, but maybe that's what that looks like. This is just an example. This isn't the be all and end all. But there's that's the point is, right, for each family to find what is it that's accessible for them? What is it that can work for them that gives them equal opportunity to truly support their child without adding any more stress and negativity to the situation, right? Because that's not going to be healthy or useful for anybody involved.
Exactly. And I love what you said. So we're coming up to the top of the hour. What would you say to the woman listening who feels overwhelmed and exhausted, and how does she reclaim her identity with all of these dynamics going on?
I would say, let's jump on a call. That's the easiest thing, because this stuff is hard to distinguish for oneself, especially if you've never really spoken about it in this way. And many of us haven't, right? So let's just have a simple conversation. It's short, it's light, there's no strings, there's no pressure. But the more clarity that you can have for yourself and the more clarity you can have about what you truly are needing, the better equipped you are at moving forward in a way that truly honors yourself and supports you.
There you go. And that's coming up to my last question. So where can people reach you?
Yes, they can email me at maria@synergisticstepparenting.com. There's 2 P's in step parenting. Or they can go to my website, also synergisticstepparenting.com. They can find me on LinkedIn at Maria Natapov, or on Facebook, also at Maria Natapov.
Okay. And by the way, everything, all the contact, all the links will be in the show notes. So contact Maria and book a call with her. She'll be more than happy to help you. Well, thank you so much, Maria. This was an amazing, powerful conversation. And thank you for not only sharing your expertise, but your heart, your story, and your truth. So this is the kind of conversation that truly breaks cycles and changes lives. So if you're listening right now and something in this episode spoke to you, I want you to know this. You are not falling, you are learning. And you have the power to respond differently starting today. So if you want to connect with Maria and learn more about her work, you can visit her at synergisticstepparenting.com. And if this episode resonated with you, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it with another woman who needs this reminder. Make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and continue being part of this movement where we break the silence and step into our unapologetic voice. So until next time, everyone, keep rising and have a great day.
Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Her Unapologetic Voice. Every conversation here is meant to help you build confidence from the inside out and find strength in your own words. If today's message resonated, follow the show and share it with a friend who's ready to lead from who she truly is. You can also connect with me on social media at Her Unapologetic Voice podcast for updates and behind the scenes insights. Remember, confidence begins when you stop apologizing for your truth and start speaking from it. I'm Angeline Constantinou, and I will see you in the next episode.